Supersonic boom should hit you in just a few seconds.
Wired recently posted an article in which they state they wish to start a conversation about online harassment and similar issues. To do this, they had a round table to which they invited several online harassers, a woman supposedly responsible for safety at Twitter and possibly responsible for the creeping censorship we're seeing there, and a con artist. We all know who we're talking about. You can go and check out the article yourself. Basically, these people have little to no credibility when talking about these issues. And while saying they wanted to start a conversation, the comments are of course closed, and they didn't invite anyone who wasn't singing from the same hymn sheet. However, in the spirit of the supposed request to start a conversation, here's an actual conversation, and here's my response. Pinning down what is and isn't harassment isn't actually that difficult when it comes to online or anything else. I mean, the Oxford English Dictionary defines it as aggressive pressure or intimidation, but we must differentiate that from argumentation and disagreement, and British law doesn't have a specific definition, but case law and so on has basically defined it as repeated attempts to impose unwanted communications and contact upon a victim in a manner that could be expected to cause distress or fear in any reasonable person, and that's according to the Crown Prosecution Service, which is about as high an authority as you get here. So why is there any argument over this? Well, the problem is that people want to extend the definition of harassment. The nature of the online world is such that when someone says something stupid, lots of people react to it. And this can feel like harassment. It can feel like an organised attempt to intimidate or threaten somebody, when actually it's many, many individual people making a choice to stand up against someone and say that what they believe is rubbish. And there's no guarantee, whatever side of the political spectrum you're on, that someone won't take exception to what you're saying. You know, whether you're arguing for gun control or whether you're arguing against abortion, you're going to get a whole bunch of people taking exception to what you say. So disagreement cannot be considered to be harassment, and yet this is the kind of territory that we're in. Lenny Sarkeesian before the UN was basically saying that people disagreeing with her and pointing out, or accusing if you prefer, that she lies, has not delivered on her promises and so on, that she's stolen material and so on. Basically taking issue with things she's done, things she said. She has tried to define that as harassment, and this is not helpful. As I think, to paraphrase what Dawkins said, I think whatever troll means, anyone who disagrees with me cannot be a useful definition. And even trolls. Are trolls harassing? Perhaps, but it's not sincere. It's to get a reaction, but is it necessarily to intimidate? It's more to make people make fools of themselves. So even there, you have trouble defining this as harassment. So there are clear legal definitions of harassment, but the problem that we're running into is that people are seeking to extend and expand the definition of harassment, because now everything we say has a wider audience, where before something you said might only be seen by a few people if you meant it as a semi-private comment. Now it can be seen by millions upon millions, and they can react to it and they can pass it on to others. And at no point is any individual person necessarily being malicious or seeking to harass someone, but you have an emergent outcry. So I don't think we can do away with that. I don't think that really qualifies as harassment. And the important part of the Crown Prosecution Service definition is reasonable person. To give an example of what might be unreasonable, many people are terrified of spiders. Here in the UK, we don't really have any poisonous spiders unless some have hidden away in a box of bananas or something. So it's not a rational fear, it's not a reasonable fear. Being utterly terrified of house spiders is not something that any reasonable person should be. Phobias are inherently irrational. Now, someone saying something mean to you online, should that cause distress or fear in any reasonable person? No. If you look at the statistics, almost nothing ever happens. Almost nothing ever comes of this. So, you know, the odds are similar, perhaps, to the odds of you finding a nasty poisonous spider hiding away in your bananas. It's not a reasonable or rational fear. So, can it reasonably be called harassment? I would say no. Now, it's not to say that harassment can't happen online. Online is just an extension of other forms of harassment, and the legal system as it exists is already set up to deal with that. It's just the court system, judges, people do not understand the internet. And apparently, nor do the people trying to extend the terms of harassment. To what extent do or should any platform have in regards to bad behaviour? Well, let's assume we're actually talking about harassment and abuse and not things that are labelled as harassment and abuse. Let's say someone is posting something libelous or defamatory about you. Well, that would be a matter for the courts, and until that's settled, I don't really believe they have much responsibility there. So what about stalking and abuse? What if someone's just sending you threats and horrible messages day in, day out? What responsibility do they have there? They're trickier. Now, when you provide a platform for people to say their piece online, I mean, you're a company, you don't have any responsibility to anyone. Unfortunately, and perhaps you should, I've argued long that private corporations, perhaps above a certain size, should be made to be as responsible as government for preserving our basic rights, such as free expression. But, genuine actual abuse is against the law. But what responsibility does a platform have? Until it's out there, until it's discovered, really none whatsoever. I mean, would you hold a paper manufacturer accountable if someone drew a dick on a piece of paper? It's an obscene publication. So do you go after Basildon Bond, or do you go after the person who drew the dick on the piece of paper? Deliberately stupid example, but you get where I'm coming from. The paper manufacturer is not responsible for what is printed, published, or drawn on its paper. That's just absurd. But internet communication exists in this strange half and half space. It's half live, it's half broadcast, and it's half written. Really, all you're providing when you're Twitter or Facebook or a blogging platform or indeed anywhere else is a space for other people to express themselves. So can you be held responsible for that? Now, currently, at least in some nations, no, you can't. So if someone posts child pornography on your platform, you're not responsible for that. The person who did it is. Now, some people have been trying to argue that this should be changed so that the platform should be made responsible. However, there is actually no real way to preserve a free internet while prosecuting platforms for things that other people post on them. I mean, think of the cyber attacks you could do. Hack into someone's website, throw some child porn on there, and that company would then be fined. It would be an effective form of activism, but would it be fair? No, it would not. The person responsible for what they say or do is the person who said or did something, not the platform. Now, that said, platforms should, and they don't have a duty or responsibility, but they should provide means by which people can filter the kind of content that they're seeing. Now, the problem with this is that it gets abused, as we've seen with blockbots, and as we've seen with other wisdom of crowds applications, such as reviews on Amazon and so on. People basically can't be trusted to use a lot of these tools responsibly. So any such tools really need to be personal. And we already have those functions on a lot of these platforms. You can block people, you can mute people, you can shadow block people so they don't know that they're blocked and can carry on screaming into the ether all they want while you don't see anything. These tools can be improved, I think. I think they can be made easier to use. But anything else runs the risk of causing real damage, and not just to the people who are genuinely abusive. As we've seen in Toronto, with the Gregory Allen Elliott trial, people are perfectly willing to abuse existing systems on sites and in the legal system to pursue and silence people who merely dissent from what they're saying. So I think platforms, as much as they have a responsibility to a degree from social pressure to help people out and to provide tools that can protect them from harsh speech and so on, they also definitely should have a responsibility to protect people's rights, and those rights include free expression. And as with society as a whole, we need to find a reasonable balance between the two. I am not particularly convinced that so-called vulnerable groups necessarily do receive a disproportionate amount of harassment. Everyone gets harassment on the internet. What I think the main difference is, and I'm mainly talking about the gendered issues here, I have more direct experience and have done more study into that, but what is different is the response. Now, various studies have shown that harassment, abuse, insults, etc. directed at men online is at the very least a significant proportion similar to the amount that women suffer, and in many cases, many studies, it's considered to be more. Know the Net ditched the label, a Pew study, there was one, I can't remember the name of it now, but anyway, they all seem to show this is sort of similar amounts, and some show that male celebrities tend to get a lot more abuse in general, but female journalists, particularly those with a feminist bent, are an outlier in that they get comparable levels of abuse. But what's different is the response. People seem to take threats and online harassment, in inverted commas, against women much more seriously than they do that against men. I mean, the men themselves don't take it that seriously. They will tend to brush it off, whereas women tend to take it to heart and to seek redress and to play it up. And there's this meme going around feminist circles that instead of the long-standing internet wisdom that you should ignore, cut off, block, otherwise just let trolls carry on and don't give them what they want. There's this meme that you should somehow respond to them, that somehow feeding the troll is a better way to go about it. And as we all know, that merely makes the problem worse, and it gives them what they want. To put it in crass terms, it's like moaning and grinding against your rapist. It does nothing for the situation. So, I mean, given those statistics, I am not convinced that, at least where women are concerned, that they are getting more harassment. I just think that they respond differently to it, and services and governments responds differently to it. And I think that, if anything, is an example of female privilege. Something must be done because a woman's upset. Now, when it comes to people of colour, God, I hate that term. When it comes to people of colour, LGBT, whatever other alphabet soup you want to add on the end, to a degree they're more visible, and their trigger points are more visible. Whereas if you're, a dude, an average dude, the things that upset you are not so obvious. Though, from what I've seen online, white men are perhaps even more likely to receive racist abuse than minorities because it's seen as acceptable. But yeah, what the things that trigger you, the things that upset you, are not immediately obvious. So people will cast around, they'll accuse you of being gay or whatever. And this is mostly just trolling or fishing for a reaction. And I'm sure the same thing happens in these other cases, but calling a black person a nigger is almost a guaranteed reaction. Saying something disparaging about women to a feminist is an almost guaranteed reaction. Calling someone a fag or whatever to a gay person is an almost guaranteed reaction. And so it's easier for trolls to go after them. They don't have to fish around for something to hit them with. So, long story short, I am yet to be convinced that harassment is disproportionate, but I think the response to harassment is disproportionate. Of course, freedoms come into conflict with people's desire to be free of harassment and abuse, or at least what they think harassment and abuse are. And it was disturbing to read in the Wired article that someone working for the Electronic Frontier Foundation was broadly siding with the other people here who were all advocating for various degrees of constriction on free expression. To mangle the Ben Franklin quote, he who would deny freedom for security deserves neither. The fact is that, except where the internet intersects with real life, nobody can actually hurt you online. There is no such thing as cyber violence. Yeah, nobody can actually cause you harm. Now, in certain vulnerable people, the suicidal and so on, and speaking of someone with depression, I know what I'm talking about here. I've been hounded online to that point. That's where the muddy area is. But that is covered by the fact that we're talking about very definite harassment. And yeah, and the tools were in my hands to ignore people, cut them off, to deny them the ability to hurt me. And I didn't use them. Because my principles, basically. So speaking from personal experience, even then, it's not that easy. There were tools available, and I didn't use them. So to an extent, it was my responsibility for not using those tools that were at my disposal to protect myself. But most of the time, nothing anyone says or does online can actually hurt you unless you allow it to. And the harm principle must be what guides us when it comes to constricting freedoms. So, is there harm in libel and slander? There's reputational harm. It's arguable whether that's real harm, but you can point to damage to businesses and so on, someone's capacity to live and take care of themselves due to that damage. So you can make an argument of harm there. Hate speech, it depends. It's contextual. Merely using the word nigger or calling someone a kike or whatever doesn't in and of itself constitute harm. Advocating for violence, these are where you start getting into the territory where you can say, this is unacceptable and we should take some kind of step against that. But even then, it may be tongue-in-cheek. It may be being done in order to undermine and make fun of the genuine bigots. So you have to be aware of nuance. And this is why the law is such a blunt instrument in these cases, because the law does not respect nuance. The law does not cope with it well, and neither do terms of service, because they are in their own way written as laws. They should be interpreted impartially. And so we need to avoid that problem as much as possible, or leave it open for decisions which may well end up being biased. So there is no good way of coping with this. But free expression is definitely in conflict with these people's desires for security, but their security is mostly not actually threatened. When it comes to doxing and things, maybe then you have a point, and I think that action should be banned. But then even that's difficult. People's real names can be found on Facebook. People's real addresses can be found online for the registry of their businesses or their domain names, and so on. So what actually constitutes doxing is hard, and anonymity has been under threat. It was ironic to read in the Wired interview that they were saying that anonymity was good in some cases, whilst they would simultaneously argue against it because it protects trolls and so on. So how do you determine who does and doesn't deserve the protection of anonymity? It's a similar problem to that which we see in, say, for example, cases of sexual assault or rape in the courts. Who deserves protection? Only the alleged victim, or does the alleged attacker as well? Because the reputational and life harm done by the mere accusation of sexual assault or rape can destroy someone's life, even if they're later found not guilty. So should we not take steps to protect them there? Yeah, it's a hard area, but I would tend to come down, at least in the online space, where actual harm is extremely hard to cause, that freedom to should harm people's idea that they have freedom from anything. There were some follow-up questions which I missed because they were particular to the things that the panelists had said. But it was noteworthy, I think, in this interview that many of the people here didn't understand that they are now the establishment, and that in some cases they are the abusers. Again, with reference to the Toronto case, Stephanie Guthrie doesn't understand that she is the abuser in that case, and was so proud about it that she made a TED talk about it. You see people like Anita Sarkeesian and others on the panel talking about how important it is to preserve the ability of dissidents in, say, Syria to speak up against the political orthodoxy, while failing to realise that they're simultaneously advocating that political dissidents against the kind of things that they believe and that they say. They're encouraging companies and governments to crack down on them. There's a shocking lack of self-awareness in many of the people who are the leading voices in this. Well, it's not a conversation. The other sides of the argument are rarely, if ever, presented. I mean, this Wired panel was practically one choir singing with the same voice. Even the Electronic Frontier Foundation person there was not taking the countering free speech position. And we need this to be a two-sided conversation. There's this unanimity being presented in the media and scapegoating and bogeymanning of groups like Gamergate, and presenting them in ways that are completely counterfactual, and all to push this same censorious agenda, while at the same time arguing that political groups in other areas need to be empowered and enabled by the internet. They seek to crack down on political and social groups in their own areas, and they do not see or understand the hypocrisy. They are perfectly willing to gang up and defame and genuinely harass people and try and get them fired over things they've said online, while at the same time seeking to insulate themselves from it. And frankly, when it comes to this kind of discussion, these people are not credible. There are problems with online harassment, and it deserves a genuine discussion, and we need to find a real and realistic balance between our freedoms and our desires for security. And I think there is compromise possible, but I do not think that the other side of this argument wishes to compromise, and that means those of us in the free speech position, who seem to be much more reasonable for the most part, are already in a weaker position because we're willing to budge and the opposition is not. But this needs to be a mature and serious discussion. The internet is no longer new, and it's about time we settled a lot of these discussions, and that we began to find new forms of etiquette and social understanding, perhaps modelled on real life situations. For example, if I say something on Twitter, it's like saying it in a pub. It's not really like broadcast media. I'm saying it to my friends and people who've chosen to follow me, but some other people might overhear, and if they choose to get offended at something that's perfectly fine with me and my friends, that's on them, it's not on me. But the internet still exists in this little understood sort of quasi-public space. And then you've got the problem of businesses poking around at people's social network activity and firing them for things that have absolutely nothing to do with their job. And this is a big tool of abuse, and it's one that's normally used by activists who find something someone says that they find objectionable and then go after their job. Now that's real, genuine harassment. It's not someone just saying, "Oh, you're a dick," online, which is nothing. It's meaningless. And yet, "Oh, you're a dick" is the thing that the conversation is about and is being taken seriously. Well, fuck that. So, the solution to free speech issues is more free speech, not less. Oh, and lastly, Wired, if you say you want a conversation, have a fucking conversation.
You can keep up with what I'm doing at postmortemstudios.wordpress.com, which also has links to everywhere that I sell my products. You can also keep up with me on Twitter at Grimachew, and if you would care to support my work, you can support me at Patreon, again at Grimachew. Anything you give there will be used to better future further projects. Thanks.